What is a 2-1 buy down? So basically it's a temporary buy down. It's a cash payment that effectively lowers the borrower's monthly payment during the early years of the mortgage. The borrower makes their monthly payment based off of the deposit that the seller made into their escrow. We'll take a look at what that looks like. Pros: it's lower payment for the buyer. It's a unique marketing opportunity for the listing side. It's a great tool for somebody that's open-minded to those things. It's going to be way more impactful to a buyer than lowering the sales price. It's really nice too for a borrower. It buys them a little bit of time to stay comfortable with that initial monthly payment as they get going. And it doesn't have to be a first-time home buyer. Ideally, it's going to protect the net profit that the seller would get from the sale, as well as the realtor commissions. That's with the mindset that it's a better, less costly way to move a property than to lower it drastically on sales price. Anything that is unused of this deposit from the seller into their escrow, it's going to get applied directly to their principal. It doesn't get lost. It doesn't get neutralized. It doesn't go back to the seller. So the cons are you do get some momentum with it, and then all of a sudden rates drop back down into the, say, the 3s or possibly even the 4s. This may not be as sexy of an option to offer or to market with as it is right now. So each loan program has got a limit to how much the seller can contribute to the buyer's transaction. These dollars go towards that. So in your smaller price ranges, your 100,000 and below, or that ballpark in general, you're going to hit your concession limit pretty quick, especially on conventional. The payment's going to increase year after year, so it feels like an ARM. The 2-1 buy down has the most traction, and that's because it's just a little less costly to the seller to have to do that. It's got to be the seller pays for it. The buyer is qualified on the biggest payment. It's the most conservative calculation. Their end payment at year 3 is going to be what we have to qualify them on. So if they're eligible on the year 1 payment, but not then we've got to rework our numbers around. So this is the meat and potatoes. And this is where it gets a little more nitty gritty. But if you are listing a property and you want to know what to prepare your seller for, as far as what they might need to contribute, this is it. This is exactly the worksheet that I use. I can do it for you and email it to you. If you say, no, I get it, just give me the worksheet, I'll send it to you blank. But the way we work through it to come up with how much the seller has to contribute is we put in your purchase price at the top, the down payment amount. So in this case, I called it 5%. And then the annual interest rate, which I just threw in 7.375. This is a 30-year loan and $10,000 down. So the monthly payment to the borrower is going to be $1,312. If you come down here, here's how we come up with the dollars that the seller has to contribute. Year 1, this is going to be their payment, the $1,312. The buy down payment after the seller has contributed is $1,063.95. The monthly savings to the borrower is $248.34. So you take that monthly savings and take it times 12 months, and that's the seller's portion right there. So for year 1, they're going to put $29.80 into the buyer's escrow account. And then year 2, they're going to fund it by $1,523. You add both years of contributions up and you come to $4,503.21. $4,503.21 is how much the seller would contribute in this transaction to do a 2-1 buy down for the buyer. The best way it makes sense to me to think of it as when the borrower makes their payment, the servicer gets it when they split it out, right? You've got principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and now you've got a buy down that's sitting there. So the seller funds it all at closing, and every month the full payment of $1,312.28 is due every month from day 1. The buyer only has to pay $1,063, and then the servicer is going to go pull $248.34 out of that pot sitting in escrow that the seller funded at closing. So this is another worksheet that I've got. So this one is a little more summarized, but it shows a little better breakdown of the monthly payment and where that comes from. So with the exact same scenario, you've got a loan amount of $190. Your full rate would be the 7.375. Same numbers here, year 1, 2, 3 through 30. But here's a good visual on the borrower is going to pay $1,063. And then the seller's portion, the $248.34, total payment, and then interest, principal, and then the balance. This worksheet gives you a little bit more of a running total as far as what your amortization looks like. So this one's okay, but I really prefer this worksheet. I think that as a realtor, if you're comfortable with it, you could pretty easily plug these figures in. And if you want me to do it, I'll do it all day long. I never have a problem putting this together for you. I think it's a good way to make it visual for a seller also. You need to do something to market a property or to get it back on the market. If you wanted to do a $200,000 listing, 7.25% rate, it's conventional, 5% down was kind of the scenario I went with. Doing this 2-1 buy down is going to cost the seller $44.78 at close, and it's going to save the buyer $246 a month the first year and $126 the second year. If you did a $10,000 price reduction, it saves the buyer $64 a month. So to me, a huge plus just to go this way with the 2-1 buy down, but our job is to make the consumer understand that, to get the buyers and the borrowers and the sellers to all understand the savings is so much greater to go this way versus that. And if you're talking to your seller, you're helping them net as much as possible by going with the 2-1 buy down. And then the buyer has got the benefit on their budget both those years. I don't feel like there's a whole lot of risk or downside on either side of the transaction. If somebody says, well, that's great, but I still don't have all the money for closing costs on top of that. As long as you haven't exceeded your threshold, then you can still ask for the seller to pay closing costs towards your traditional fees. So that doesn't work with all scenarios, but it's an idea anyway. When you're talking about competitive offers, if you've got two people coming into the same property and you just reverse mind this and say, okay, I'm going to offer you 10,000 less than you're listing it for. Or you could come in and say, talk your buyer into coming after this 2-1 buy down and only taking $44.78 away from the seller rather than the 10,000.
Exactly.
There's a question in the chat about how to specifically write it in the contract. And that's a really good point. With this, what I found after officially moving through first one in underwriting, they came back and said that the specific dollar amount that is going to be used in the 2-1 buy down has to be noted in the purchase contract. You would want to break it out in your miscellaneous. And if you use this scenario, you could say seller agrees to pay $4,478.64 towards 2-1 buy down for buyer. And then second line, seller agrees to pay $3,000 towards buyer's closing costs and or prepaids. So from a marketing standpoint, I feel like it's a little tricky because not everybody's familiar with it. Nobody's interacted with one. So I feel like how it gets portrayed needs to be thoughtful. How you present these numbers to a Facebook post or something like that needs to be done correctly for it to get its full impact.
Is there a percentage on the purchase price, or how does that work? How do you know what that percentage is from the seller? How do you know how to do that?
Where that dollar amount comes from?
Yeah.
It's just the difference in payment. So if you take the payment with that 7.375 and then you compare it side by side to a 5.375, the difference in principal and interest, that's how much the seller has to pay. And so the savings between 7.375 and 5.375 is $248 a month. And just take that savings times 12 months. Okay. That's what they got to put in the pot.
The 2-1, the 2 means 2%, 1%. Yes. Okay.
2% the first year, 1% the second year, which is why this is a little more popular than the 3-2-1, because you go all the way down to 4.375 and your out of pocket to the seller is going to be, well over $300 a month. So all of a sudden they're contributing a much bigger chunk. So the 2-1 just seems to kind of satisfy everybody.